Hello and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alfonso Silva, and I am the project coordinator at Family Builders by Adoption in Oakland, California. My primary responsibilities are working with California Kids Connection, which is the adoption exchange and photo listing site for the state of California. For my action research project, I decided to explore ways to better support and prepare families to parent older youth. While I do not work closely with the Foster to Adopt team anymore, this is where I started with the agency. I do have that connection to the program, and as we look at new trends in child welfare in the state, I like to focus on ways that we can continue to better serve youth and families. Before I dive into my ARP, I believe it's useful to set the stage and give you some information related to California. As of April 1st, 2019, there were 59,328 children and youth aged 0 to 21 living in care. Foster care ranges from pre-adoptive placements, living with relatives or NRFMs, county foster homes, foster family agency homes, group homes, shelters, transitional housing, etc. For the purpose of my ARP, it is important to note that 38,511 of the youth in care are over the age of 6. That's nearly 65% of the youth living in foster care. It's just as significant to acknowledge that for the youth under the age of 6, 14,555 of them are not available for adoption. There are various reasons why these kids are not available for adoption. Most of them are placed in county foster homes or with relatives or NRFMs. This trend is likely associated to the implementation of the Resource Family Approval Program that went into effect January 1st, 2017. As the state has streamlined the process to reunify or place children with their family, we are noticing that less younger kids are being referred to county adoption units. Now that I've been able to talk about the state a little bit, I want to switch direction and share more information about Family Builders. Family Builders is a dual-licensed foster family agency. Our mission states that we believe every child has the right to grow up in a permanent, nurturing family, regardless of the child's age, race, ethnicity, gender, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, or any medical, physical, or emotional condition. The core of our work is finding permanency for youth in care, and we have various programs that would do that through. One of the special things about my agency is that I trust that everyone working there is mission-driven. This is not only my impression, but it's something that has been noted both by folks who have worked there and even by folks who have visited our agency, whether it's for a training or a meeting. As I mentioned earlier, I focused on a concern that stood out to me within the Foster to Adopt program. I decided to focus on an issue that looks both at the reality of who the children and youth living in foster care are and areas where the agency can continue to adhere to the mission. At the time that we started this fellowship, I looked at how many families we had in search. For clarification purposes, search is the point in time when a family has completed all paperwork and training and is working with our staff to add a child to their family. Out of the 42 families in search, only 19% of them were interested in parenting a child over the age of 8. What was even more alarming was that only 2%, or one family, was open to the idea of parenting a teen. And even that family had a very specific search parameter at the time. Now that I've been able to share some context for foster care statistics from our state, and I have identified an area of opportunity for the agency, I started to focus more on my ARP. I knew that this issue warrants closer attention because as an agency that is committed to permanency, we don't want to see youth growing up in long-term foster care and then aging out of the system. We are not setting up these youth for success. The trajectories for youth aging out of foster care are not positive. Many youth end up involved in crime, substance abuse, younger pregnancies, and there's more that we can do for them. At the beginning of the project, I was therefore focusing on developing a recruitment model that was informed both by other evidence-based practices, from programs and interventions that dealt with supporting adoptive families of older youth, and by the families themselves. And I hope that this model will then increase the interest of future prospective adoptive families. Although that was my initial plan, I do want to let you know that my PICO did change through the course of this project. So while I was initially interested in developing a recruitment model, that later changed in my planning phase. In my plan phase 2 is when I started to do a lot more research around my topic. I gathered information from various sources. While many of them were national resources from organizations such as Adopt US Kids and Annie E. Casey Foundation, I also found useful information by accessing reports from Los Angeles County. Most of the information that I found most useful was through in-person meetings with various folks. My mentor, Jill Jacobs, was a great help in helping me connect with some of these people. The data I found included information from many different perspectives. Even though I was initially focused on developing a recruitment model, as I said earlier, that did change. Some of the things I learned through this process include the importance of staff being well-versed in all aspects of how we support families. I read a report from LA County, and one of the things that stood out to me was that some foster parents, especially some who have been doing it for a long time or were approved for intensive services foster care, questioned the credibility of social workers, therapists, and other support staff that did not have any prior parenting experience. I also learned about the importance of helping prospective families consider and prepare for adopting older youth. This Adopt US Kids resource offered great conversations topics that range from helping parents understand brain development so they learn about typical teen behavior, and also what may be a response to trauma the youth experience. To navigate ways the adoptive family can help a youth maintain connections that are important to him or her. I was also pleased to see so much support for taking a deeper look at the child's previous connections to see if we can explore permanent options with someone from their past, but also to ensure that we continue to speak about permanency with youth and not just take the first no for an answer when discussing adoption, but rather take time to understand the youth's concern and helping them address them. I think this is important because as you will see, some of our families had to navigate similar situations even after the youth had been living with them for months. Most of the research I found led me to a new discovery. Our agency does not have the appropriate infrastructure in place to fully support prospective families parenting teens. For example, through my research, I compiled a list of supports that have been effective with other organizations and programs. Some of the supports include agency staff. We want to ensure that everyone on staff are knowledgeable about the needs of older youth waiting to be adopted. For example, resources provided by the Adopt US Kids addresses the family's comfort when staff is able to address topics related to older youth adoption. By addressing these topics, we can train our staff to ensure we are all on the same page. A family mentor program. Both national and state resources address the benefit adoptive families receive when they are part of a family mentor program. There's also a benefit to connecting families to additional resources for education, providing ongoing training to families on topics such as techniques for communicating with adolescents, understanding teen decision-making, preparing youth for college and employment, developing healthy relationships, depression in youth, building self-esteem, identity and sexuality, and substance abuse or gang-related activity. One of the most significant gaps in the data that I accessed from external resources compared to our internal agency data was that sources identify strong prospective families, but our families who have adopted older youth didn't always match with that description. The external resources I gathered did not dive into the strength of the LGBTQ+ community and their interest in parenting older youth. This is something that I will address shortly when I discuss our family demographics. Overall, the research gave me useful information to bring up to the agency's leadership team to address an area of opportunity. In addition to that, It helped me realize that while my PICO would stay somewhat similar, it gave me the opportunity to really involve our finalized families into informing the development of our infrastructure. What the youth is concerned about that is influencing him or her to make that decision. And so through this research, again, I found out that there are different ways for us to improve our services. One of those is to ensure that we are training agency staff. And this will help us provide a great customer service experience from every aspect. From recruitment through the development process, which could be kind of daunting for a lot of families, but also as we are preparing them through the home study process, so they have very realistic expectations about what it looks like to be in search once they have completed that process. Another thing that was suggested was a family mentor program. And so a lot of different organizations have that, and that is a program where they pair finalized families with families that are going through the process, and therefore families have another family to relate to that might be going through or might have gone through a similar experience as they have. One other thing that was recommended was providing resources to connections to navigate the education system. That was something that our families also discussed, and something that they have challenges navigating themselves. And also, another thing that was recommended was developing training topics that relate to older youth. And after having looked at our training for our agency, I did notice that there were areas where we can better incorporate topics that relate to older youth. And some of these topics include techniques for communication with older youth, understanding brain development and what that looks like for a youth that has been exposed to trauma, as well as youth that has lived in congregate care for a long time. There was another area of opportunity for us to address college and employment. Again, most of our training is dealing with topics that relate to younger kiddos, and these are topics that would benefit all families, really, because at some point that 1-year-old will be a teen, and it would be great if he or she were going to college and we could prepare our families to really have those conversations and know what resources are out there for their kiddos. Integration and implementation. The first thing I wanted to do was develop a survey, and I meant to survey our families that have finalized older youth. And so what I started looking at was looking at all families that adopted a child over the age of 8 from our agency within the last 10 years. And from that, I was able to survey 41 families. Of the 41 families, I got 13 families that responded to my survey, so I got a 32% response rate. And then from all the families that responded to my survey, I then created a focus group. And so out of the 13 families that responded, I reached out to 7, and I was able to meet with 3. The focus group was on an individual basis. This was not with all the finalized families, just due to the fact that some of the families that finalized have moved out of the Bay Area and just live in different states, and so it's complicated to get them all in the same room. Findings. So, so again, I emailed 41 families, and I got 13 families that responded back to my survey. All the 13 families that responded were 2-parent families, and I think that it warrants me to say that because not all the families that have adopted through the agency were 2-parent families. Of the 41 families that I surveyed, 9 are single-parent families, and then the rest are 2-parent. The median age for our respondents is 51. Ethnicity, all the respondents are Caucasian, so I will address that shortly. And then for sexual orientation and gender identity, again, I thought that was very unique to our area. Out of the 13 respondent families, 6 identify as gay, 2 identify as lesbian, 1 identifies as queer, and 4 identified as straight. And in regards to education, 93% of our respondents have a bachelor's degree or higher, and of that, 53% have masters or JD, MD, etc. So I'm essentially going to go through all the questions in my survey. One of the first questions was their motivation behind adopting older youth. And for a few of our and these are all some of the trends that I discovered through my data. For some of our families, they did not want to go through the baby experience again. So this meant that they already had a previous child and they kind of got that out of their system. And for other families, they understood this is where the need really lies. They were not trying to come into the foster to adopt world, starting with the baby, when they knew that there was a lot of teens in foster care that also need that support and structure. Other families stated that they made a connection with the youth, and this is where I feel like I feel very glad that I work for the Adoption Exchange Program, because I am responsible for putting some of those events. So it's really nice to see there is a positive effect to having a matching event, because our families have definitely read a profile of a youth, but it's not until they meet him or her that they start developing that connection and relationship that they get to see beyond what's on paper, and I think that is very special. And also for some of our LGBTQ families, they did address some hardships they had growing up. And for one family in particular, unfortunately, when she came out, she was disowned by her family. And that is something that she definitely wants to protect other youth from. This is a very supportive family, and regardless of whether kiddos end up in their sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression journey, they are very supportive of whatever. And after that, I wanted to explore barriers in adoption. So as we know, trauma is something that we often talk about, and our families said that this was a huge barrier because trauma affects youth in many different ways. For some families, they had a hard time attaching. For some families, they really had to work with the youth in navigating their grief and loss, which also brought up some emotions on the parents. There was also a lot of mistrust, especially from teens, just due to the fact that they had experienced multiple placements and they were not sure if this is really going to be their adoptive home. And also, some of the older youth had grown up with more independence, and so coming into an adoptive setting where there was more structure and rules made them clash a little bit more with their family. Other barriers were social workers. In California, every county has their own jurisdiction, and therefore there are 58 different answers sometimes. And so, for some families, it was difficult to get the agency social worker to agree with the county social worker, whether it was in providing additional resources or services for their kiddos. And then also, some families stated that they felt the process just takes too long. And so, what we can do in regards to address this is ensuring that we're, being very transparent with our families and what the requirements are. So, I also wanted to address what supports and services have been useful for their families. Most all of our families said the training was very, very useful, and we do our Pride training, which is a full 24 hours. And on top of that, we also have a specialized baby care training, and we also offer quarterly trainings with our agency. So again, our families have a lot of exposure to different topics that relate to foster care adoption. The other support that was very beneficial to them was our staff. And most of them did name drop their social worker and just talked about what a great relationship they had even beyond finalization. They talked about how they have been able to reach out from time to time, and our staff have been able to help them navigate whatever issues they're currently facing. Another support that was very useful was therapy, not only for the youth, but also for the family as a whole. Another thing that was very beneficial were support groups. So we, at our agency, we do have a support group that meets on a monthly basis, and things like that have definitely helped some of our newer families feel more supported while they are adopting. And then finally, financial support. So financial support has been very beneficial both for tutoring, therapy, and just meeting needs of the kiddos. When I asked them what they recommend other families should know about adopting older youth, they were very candid and honest with this piece of it, this piece of the interview process, and they said that trauma-informed care is a must. Again, parenting a kid that has lived in foster care is very different than parenting your own kiddo. And so our families are really saying that families need to take the time to really understand what that looks like, as broad as it could be, because it does offer some information about development and essentially decision-making of the youth. For those that parented teens, they were very careful in what advice they were giving, but they did say that the youth do have a word in their case plan, and the family should try their best to be supportive and not take that personal. There is a lot that the youth is going through when he or she decides they don't want to be adopted, and that additional pressure from the family doesn't really ease the situation. And that kind of segues into the last one, which is patience. Families really have to be flexible with their own expectations. This process will be different, and no two families will go through the same exact process. And so the families really encourage future families to try their best to put themselves in the youth's shoes to ensure that we're being careful and we're being supportive of them. So in regards to what else they need from our family, one was support groups, which I know they also said it was very beneficial, but I surveyed families within the last 10 years, and some of the families that recommended that had finalized their adoption before we implemented these support groups. However, through my focus group, I was able to dig a little bit deeper and find out what kind of support they wanted. And this kind of goes back to the families that are parenting teens. They feel that they need their own support because it is not the same experience to be in a support group of parents parenting younger kiddos. Training kind of goes back along the similar route. Our families would like more training around topics that actually deal with teens and with scenarios that they might actually face. They would also like more respite and babysitting services. Some families did ask for additional help navigating the education system. And also, some families recommended that they would appreciate ongoing check-ins from their social workers. We often allow the family to make the connection with us if they need extra support. And so it was interesting to see that some families would benefit from the agency taking that initiative and checking in on them. So after I got all that information, like I said, I created a focus group. And the purpose of the focus group was for me to compile all this information from our families and then present that to our families to ensure that what they were recommending, I was interpreting correctly. And I think that also gave me the opportunity to really go back to the people that we survey and really make sure that I'm capturing that voice. Thank you, Sherilyn. As you mentioned, as we survey people, we often don't go back to that source. And so I think that being able to do that through the focus group allowed me to get more information. So some of the things that I wanted to explore during my focus group was what type of focus did the agency make around adopting older youth? I wanted to see to what extent did we address the need for families to adopt older youth. I also wanted to understand to what extent those families felt prepared to meet the needs of their youth. I also wanted to get more understanding of around what services and supports were not that useful, and also wanted to see if these families would be interested in being part of a family mentor program. And so through those interviews, I found that these families felt that the agency did not make a huge emphasis on parenting older youth. And so I did get a chance to sit with my mentor, Jill, and look at which families were responding to that, and just trying to see if there were certain things that were going on during the time they were in the process, and trying to address those concerns. But from our families that did finalize within the last 3 years, they had different responses, meaning that they saw that our social workers talked about the SF Older Youth Permanency Program, which to that family kind of started lighting that, the little light bulb that there is a possibility for them to adopt a teen. Another thing that I discovered was that families had a hard time relating with other families in their communities. And what I mean by that, there is a 2-parent family based out of San Francisco, and and a lot of their friends have kiddos. So when they were going through the adoption process, they felt that they were going to have all the support from their peer of family friends. And the support just wasn't there in the way they were expecting. So rather, some of their peers said, if you adopted a baby, this would be a much easier process. And to that family, again, I'm very grateful that they just kind of ignored that advice. But they also replied with, well, a baby's going to be a teen at some point. So, it's very interesting. This family adopted a 17-year-old, and so that is nothing that's often heard of. And so I try to understand the sentiment from their peers, but at the same time, I'm just so proud of this family for really sticking through a lot of different challenges to ensure that they provided that structure and nurture for their son. And I also found out that a lot of our families are not only interested in the Family Mentor Program, but are also interested in being part of an ongoing panel that offers advice to the staff to think about future recommendations for change. So, as I said, research has offered numerous ways that we can better support our families. And so some of the suggestions for change include staff training. There is an importance for all of our staff to understand the number of older youth living in our area, understand some of their traits, so that we can better discuss those with our families and help them see that they are ready to parent an older youth. As I mentioned, the Mentor Family Program has a lot of positive support. I think that there is definitely a benefit in having families meet other families that adopted youth that are similar in age. So I think it's very important for us to think of those age parameters, just because the experience of a family, again, parenting a younger kiddo, is going to be way different than that of a family parenting a teen. And so I think that with the Family Mentor Program, we would be able to normalize the family's experience a little bit better, while also having other families really relate to similar issues and concerns that they're both going through. And then in regards to educational resources, this part's also very challenging for the agency, because we do have a lot of different resources available for our families. We have a full library of different books and videos that our families are always welcome to check out. And so hearing that families would like more support around certain of these topics lets us know that we could do a better job at ensuring that our families know about these resources, know that they are free and always accessible. And then in regards to awareness, so this is really where, it's a bit of my concern. I think that if our families feel that the agency is not placing a huge emphasis around adopting older youth, they're not going to do it. Unless people really know about the numbers and the need, they won't always do that research themselves. So I think that it gives the agency the opportunity to raise awareness from our orientation presentation to our Pride training and to our home study, and start really discussing topics such as brain development and what that looks like for a kid that has been exposed to trauma and those that have not. Also, start working with the family's expectations and bringing those down a little bit, because again, this is just going to be a very unique process for them. And then also, because we're talking about older youth, really looking at the effects that living in congregate care has on our youth, as again, a lot of our older youth have lived in group homes to some extent. So we also would like, another suggestion for change would be compiling a list of resources for our families to have handy, so that when they do finalize, if they do not reach out or what have you, they have that list ready. And this list of resources would explore things like obtaining IEPs for their youth, obtaining records for their children, navigating higher education, so giving families resources that would guide them through the FAFSA process, and also scholarships that older youth may be eligible for, especially those who have lived in foster care, and also looking at benefits of AB 12 and how that can continue to support older youth. It's also important to note that family builders cannot do everything by themselves. We cannot address all these needs and implement everything overnight. I think that this is really an opportunity for us to also develop new collaborations with other agencies in the area that might be able to support, provide some of the support that our families would need in the process. So what's next? Well, I can tell you that setting up the infrastructure takes some time, and you know, it's giving the agency the opportunity to take all the work that I've done through the fellowship and keep implementing the change going forward. So the next thing that I want to do is presenting all of this to our Adopt team. Again, this is a team that is recruiting, well, they're developing the family through the entire process, and before I go in and start changing the orientation and training, I want to get their buy-in. You know, I'm not just going to come in here and create the entire change for them. So instead, we're creating a work group. And I believe that the work group will increase the ability of employees to participate in the planning and decision-making and problem-solving and being part of a team that is drafting recommendations for the agency. I know Addie is not here today, but you know, she was just a great support in teaching me ways that she she instilled change in her organization and how she did it in a very collaborative process. And that's something that I definitely want to do to ensure that we are addressing all the concerns that our families have had, but I do that as a team with buy-in from everyone at the very beginning so that we are able to implement change and and also address any concerns that our staff may have around time and feasibility of implementing everything within a timeline. And so once we have those lists of recommendations, then we'll be going to the leadership team, and the leadership team will then review what we can start implementing for the infrastructure to ensure that we are supporting future families through the process. So there were definitely some challenges and barriers that I encountered through my action research project. And so, you know, one of them, I felt that I got a low response rate. You know, I emailed 41 families and only 13 replied. So there's definitely a lot more that I could have learned from our other families. Working across teams was definitely a bit of a challenge. You know, I do not work directly with the Foster to Adopt program, and so you know, a challenge was definitely finding that balance between still you know, meeting my responsibilities, but also putting enough time aside for the project and getting to meet, you know, these new families that I've never interfaced with before. So you know, it was interesting. It definitely helped me manage my time a little bit better. Another barrier, and I kind of thought about this way down the line, was that I never captured the youth's voice. And I know that is very difficult for various reasons, but you know, I became more interested in what the youth experienced, especially with some of our families that, you know, finalized about 8-9 years ago. You know, I feel like there was some value in maybe in checking in with the youth and understanding more about what the adoption process was like for them as well. And demographics. I can assure you that not all of our families are Caucasian. So that was definitely threw me off a little bit. I think that there's a lot of value in what our families of color go through when they're adopting, and so definitely feel a little bummed that I wasn't able to get a wider response from all of our other families. And then also Bay Area problems. You know, some of the families that were part of my focus group, as I mentioned earlier, have moved out of the Bay Area, and they have moved to states that don't always provide the best support and services. And so for them, it has been challenging to meet other adopted families, but also find that great therapist that has adoption experience, or getting an IEP for some of their kiddos has been such a huge challenge. So, and I also understand that they're not able to always remain in the Bay Area. The cost of living is through the roof. And so this is a balance that our families also have to navigate. But you know, it does add, it does make their process a little bit more challenging. So, reflections. I'm very, very grateful for MPLD and all the work that we have put in. You know, the fellowship did have a huge impact in the way that I work with my team. I've been able to, I feel that I've been able to empower them a little bit better by having more open-ended conversations, not only about my project, but also around my program. As I mentioned earlier, I had to definitely restructure my time in a way that I was still meeting all the requirements for the fellowship, but it gave me an opportunity to get my team involved in some of the things that I do to manage the program. And I feel that that also just allows them to understand the grand scheme of things and be more involved as well. Not everything was great during the fellowship. I had some, a few hiccups here and there, and I learned the value of being prepared. I had a presentation with my leadership team that I felt very rushed, and I think it came off in a very standoffish way. And so, it's very important for all of us to take our time, be patient as our families, advise, and really map out what you have to say and do it in a respectful way. And kind of goes into my last point, be humble. I gave the presentation, I got some feedback after it, and even though I knew that I felt somewhat rushed, I thought it went well. And so it was just interesting to see that your perception of things are not always the best. And I had to check in with one of our managers, and she provided just great advice. And due to that conversation, it reminded me to be humble and also to drop the word should from my vocabulary. And so, before I open it up for questions, I do want to thank Sharon Lynn and Addie for just providing so much support, Ingrid answering every email, I appreciate that, and just, again, MPLD for seeing something in all of us, keeping us grounded, even though our Pico was way up here. And again, just providing us with this platform to talk about some of the barriers that we're facing and hopefully be able to exchange ideas to address some of those. Thank you.